Welcome, all of you good investors. We've got a great episode for you today. I've got two amazing guests with me. Sonia Vinogradova is Director of Engagement at Greenback Revolution. Welcome, Sonia.
Hey Tim, great to be here.
And
So
Calvin
excited.
Trottier-Chi is the Research Lead at Greenback Revolution. Calvin's so happy you could join us today.
Hi, also very glad to be here. Everyone in the impact space always says, talk to Tim Nash, so I'm excited to be here on the record talking to Tim Nash.
Amazing. On the record, let's go. I'm so happy to have you both here because you're both such brilliant people, sort of in this climate finance space, but also really excited about your project, the Greenback Revolution. So this is a really cool thing. Calvin, I think we first met in Ottawa at the Sustainable Finance Summit. You came to my pub night, and we were able to have a drink and get to know each other.
I still have a free
And
book from that event.
Amazing, that's right. And that we were able to have some great chats, and I learned about the Greenback Revolution. Really, what you're trying to do is to help young people invest in what matters. It's really fortunate because we're aligned in terms of what we think really matters to the world in terms of sustainability and environmental issues and social justice issues as well. When I was doing my research for the Green Transition Scoreboard, we did the latest update that showed just a hair under $20 trillion invested in green sectors since
Woo!
2015. But as I was doing those numbers and trying to get all those facts and figures right, it was the two of you that I sort of leaned on from a data perspective. So, it's really cool that not only are you, really interested on sort of the big picture green economy issues, but also on the micro, like helping regular people invest their own money in what matters. So, absolutely love having the two of you here on the show. Sonia, I'll start with you, and Calvin, know that you're going to be up next for this, but I really want to understand sort of what was the spark that got you so passionate about climate finance?
Yeah, well, climate finance is a big topic. It is generally finance, like where is our money going? Where is it now? And where should it go? I actually did my undergrad in business before I did my master's in environmental sustainability. And in business school, we always talked about the bottom line. And then it was kind of a new crazy concept to talk about the triple bottom line or ESG or CSR. And it always confused me in those classes because I was like, finance has such a big influence in the world. Like we can't deny money has a huge influence. And when we even think about our own finances, we get so stressed about where our money is going, how much do we have, like what should we spend it on? And that's the same thing on a big scale, on the market scale. And the triple bottom line is basically a concept of like getting businesses to think about their influence on the society in a more holistic, more broad way that includes environmental and social factors, right? Which is crazy because the market was never separate from the rest of the world. It was never separate from society. It was never separate from the environment. When you open a new factory or you make an investment in a tech company, that's going to impact people, that's going to impact jobs, and that's going to impact the environment, the place that you're going to build this, whatever infrastructure you need. So it was confusing to me that we kept talking about triple bottom line or these social goals as separate from business goals because business is not inherently separate from society, as I've said. And I think it was like in 94 that the triple bottom line was introduced. So I don't know what businesses were doing before then. It was probably just some really hardcore people that really loved making a good impact with what they were doing. I don't know. But basically, if I think about it, my vote aligns with my values, my spending aligns with my values, and like what's left is my investments. I think investing is an easy way to spread your ability to do good, and investing diversification is a good thing. So you should spread your ability to do good as much as possible. So if I want to diversify my impact, then I need to understand how climate finance works and where can my dollar make the biggest difference.
That's awesome. I mean, for me, I had to go overseas. I did an exchange to New Zealand to learn about triple bottom line economics. It was nowhere in my undergrad whatsoever. So,
Not
I'm
even
at
in
least
Canada, eh?
not,
New
no,
Zealand.
no. I mean, this would have been 2002 ish, 2003, four, somewhere in there that I was doing my undergrad, but it was nowhere to be found. And so, to me, I'm happy to hear that, you did at least got exposed to some of these ideas in undergrad. That's a small win. I'll take it as a
Yeah.
step in the right direction. But also, I love the fact that sort of the business school background, and then started asking these questions, and then, doing a master's in environmental science and trying to bridge those two worlds. Certainly that aligns
Yeah,
so much,
absolutely.
so closely with my path. So I love it. Calvin, how about you? How did you become such a nerd in this space?
Like most nerds, through books. I started in my undergrad, which I also did a undergrad in economics and then master's of more environmental focus. Uh,
Yeah.
I read a great textbook called Energy and the Wealth of Nations, which posited how all of economic development can be seen through the lens of getting access to increasingly concentrated sources of energy, and how that energy use underpins so much of the future economic behavior, but also imposes additional costs that aren't really brought into the market all the time. Then later on in my undergrad, I saw the devastation that environmental degradation can have firsthand. So I've been interested in climate economics for a long time. But what got me interested in the investing angle specifically, I think, is two main events. The first was when President Trump was reelected. It seemed like the last line of defense for the Inflation Reduction Act was the investment dollars. Like when it came down to it, when it was do or die, what people fell back on was the fact that 85% of the finance mobilized by the Inflation Reduction Act was going towards Republican states.
Wow.
And the other event, and I think this is something that a lot of our generation can relate to, was seeing the GameStop rally back in 2021.
I love the GameStop rally. It's so interesting to talk about.
Okay, so let's describe that, because not everyone, in my audience probably followed meme stocks during COVID, but this was during COVID, I believe.
Yeah.
That really, people, my experience is that a lot of people couldn't gamble on sports anymore, and so figured out that they could gamble on the stock market.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so explain, and then Calvin, explain what happened with GameStop. GameStop is like a video game retailer, right? Like, this is a company, it's a publicly traded company, it has a stock. But what happened to that stock? Why did it become such a big deal?
So like you said, people were at home, probably had a bit more, the fortunate people had a bit more disposable income because they weren't going out and spending. They were probably also sitting at home playing a lot of video games. And also maybe, and this is my social scientist coming in, maybe them being online together was also an opportunity to network and organize in some fashion as well online, to demonstrate
Yeah,
an
it's
alternative platforms and you couldn't demonstrate in person.
just like it's crazy to me. And this is kind of what we talk about at Greenback, why the retail investor has more power than they think they have.
Totally.
In January 2021, like at the height of everyone holding GameStop stock, like no one wants to, no one wants this company to die. I don't know if you have a personal connection to GameStop, but like I remember there was a GameStop in the mall that I used to like go to all the time after school. And I used to game. Like I used to go in there. I used to buy games. I used to talk to the people. Like it was a weird space, but you had this like kind of love for it in a funny way. And I think people really connected with that in the pandemic, and they didn't want this company to die. It was closing stores, it was going bankrupt, but they believed in the community that it had created.
Yeah, and they saw that, Wall Street firms were shorting this company that, and they felt had a value that wasn't represented. So they decided to rally together and make a difference around that.
And it was wild because, really what happened. So you said Wall Street is shorting a stock, which means when you short a stock, you're selling the stock without owning it. You're betting that the share price is going to go down, right? Which, instead of supporting, like if we talk about impact investments, when we buy shares in a company, we're sort of supporting that company and the share price. And, if more people are buying it, then the share price goes up and the company prospers. But when people are shorting the stock, they're sort of like putting downward pressure on it, right? And Wall Street was doing that. And so it was like basically like internet gamers, retail investors, but especially young retail investors, kind of like created this community and just started buying the stock. And
Yeah,
what was
diamond
the impact they
hands.
had? What was the impact that they had on the share price? What happened?
The impact was tremendous. I don't know off the top of my head exactly how much jumped off, but what I do know is that in January 2021, the heyday of all this activity, retail investors made up half of the equity purchases on the Toronto Stock Exchange, half of equity
Wow.
activity. So for that
Wow.
entire month, the gamers sitting on their couch slash bed playing a video game, scrolling through Wall Street bets, they were as representative of the Canadian stock market as a floor trader getting their shoes shined.
Wow. That's so cool. Okay. So that was the spark that it was like, whoa, everyday retail investors, especially if we sort of like organize and come together, can actually move the dial when it comes to the stock market. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Amazing. That's so cool. I love that. I love that story. And my goodness, imagine, to think of us coming together around, whatever it is, whatever sort of investment theme we want to direct that energy towards, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's water infrastructure, whether it's community bonds and affordable housing. But just imagine sort of having that power of really being able to move markets. I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
I
that
Again,
was
think people want to do that. They just need a guiding hand.
yeah,
right?
people want to invest with their values. Like they valued GameStop and they showed it. And we value a lot of things that are shared, like housing, like infrastructure, transportation. Why not reflect that in the way we invest?
Ooh, speaking my language, that's for sure. That's for sure. I do think that it's a little bit tricky that sometimes we do feel helpless as sort of like a small fish, right? And that it's tough to see some of the bigger trends that we do feel almost like at the whim of some of these more macro level environments. And so, it was interesting. Like we did this research together on the Green Transition Scoreboard data. So we looked at different things like investments in renewable energy, water, green construction, and electric vehicles. Showed that, really, I think there has been way more investment than people realized, right? That was kind of my hope, was to show people that, hey, there's, lots of money flowing into this direction. We worked together on that data. Was there anything that surprised you that kind of stuck out to you as we were sort of sorting through the weeds on that data?
I just want to jump in and say, yeah, it's much more than I think people recognize. We've ran the data by a few retail investors, individual community members, and I can understand if they get the scale completely wrong. That's fine. I can understand that some people don't realize the scale of trillions that we're talking about when it comes to infrastructure. But what people seem to be surprised by is that there is more investment flowing into the clean economy and clean energy than fossil fuels, and that continues to be so, even projected into 2025. So
Amazing. So
it's not
just,
surprising me, but it surprises many people that we speak to.
and so almost as like a head to head, sort of green economy versus fossil fuels, the fact that we're now coming out ahead, that we've sort of like caught up and then have now exceeded, absolutely, I think gives people sort of that winning energy. Sonia, anything from on your end?
Yeah, no, just adding on, like all new investments into energy are all double into clean energy what they are into fossil fuels. And I also in the green transition work, I was really surprised by the amount of growth in the transportation sector. Like there was huge growth change between 2020 and 2021 of the investment. And this is really encouraging. It because we need to be decarbonizing all sectors. And basically, one thing I was digging into it more, and emissions from cars are reducing a lot. Between like since 1990, cars are seeing huge emissions reductions. But we aren't just talking about individual consumer responsibility. It's not all on like your individual consumer choice. So larger transportation, like air transport and ships, need to decarbonize as well. So it's like the entire supply chain is reducing its emissions, which would help companies meet their emissions targets as well. So overall, this benefits companies that have promised to be part of that better future.
Yeah, no question. I think one thing that we've chatted a little bit about is sort of like, the problem is, okay, so we have this like big picture, macro green transition scoreboard, that the green economy is growing at a fast clip and it's great. But how do retail investors kind of get in on that? I'm just curious for you guys, like, in terms of chatting with folks, and that, are you finding that there is a barrier, for folks who are maybe understand this big picture trend, but haven't taken any action when it comes to their personal investments?
Yeah, so it's a lot of folks don't realize this trend, And even realizing the trend, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that actually getting involved in it is easy. Another thing that stood out to me from the data was how sustainable bond issuance after jumping after 2020 ended up being relatively stable. And to me, as a citizen and an investor, the beauty of a green bond is that it's a commitment for the use of proceeds to go towards something sustainable, and it's established. It's something that I know how I could get involved in. So the fact that green bond issuance or sustainability bond issuance is relatively stable makes me wonder to what extent are these sustainable activities being financed by, larger on-balance sheet budgets, which are harder for the retail investors to be involved in, and maybe don't have the same sort of commitment. And just as easily as they can be put towards sustainable activities, maybe they could be as easily taken out. And so to me, what this data also shows is the need to keep pushing for those green bonds and other financial instruments that are tangible, understandable, and committed, and ideally accessible and possible for retail investors to get involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of information online. There are good sustainability bond ratings, sustainability equity ratings as well. And we have some of those resources on our websites, greenbackrevolution.ca. So I really encourage anyone who's interested to learn more, check it out there. But also, like, just personally talking to, if you're a listener of this or just someone in the space, just talking to your friends and colleagues about it that maybe aren't working in the same space you are. Like when I talk to my friends that are working in the arts sectors, in supply chain sectors, in energy, but maybe aren't so focused on what their investments are doing. It's a really new concept to a lot of people. Like they don't realize that there are ways that they can choose to invest, um, which is kind of funny because when we at Greenback, when we talk to really financially focused people, they are really specific on how they want to make the perfect portfolio, because of all the trends and research that they're reading online. But they could also be taking one step forward and making that portfolio specific to the future that they want to live in. So, especially in a future that is going to be affected by climate change, then why not make your portfolio match that and insulate your portfolio from climate change, basically dangerous.
Sorry, just jumping in and earn returns at the same time. So
Yeah.
some studies have one study that we like to go to has showed that the majority of people earn less than 3% interest on their savings. And yeah, I imagine that's hard for you to hear, Tim,
Yeah.
given how many better and accessible options you often see. From our perspective, we often see community bonds in the 3 to 5% return range. So that means that if the majority of people, and I'm speaking now as an economic researcher, not a financial advisor, speak to someone like Tim to know what's right for you. But that means that the majority of people, if they put their savings into a community bond instead, that would be better impact and better returns. So economically speaking, that's a massive inefficiency.
Yeah, I think as economic researchers, Calvin and I are really passionate about the space and we're happy to present the data, but it's people like you, Tim, that really make that difference. And how is it talking to people about their money and asking them these types of questions? Like, what are their reactions?
It's, talking to people about money is hard. Like nobody wants, like it's just so taboo, and people have all of these sort of psychological barriers. There's some sort of growing work, and there's a cool book that just came out called The Trauma of Money, right?
Mm.
And understanding that so many people have these experiences when they were growing up and different things. And, so many people have this idea, oh, I'm terrible at money. I'm just bad at money. I just don't, right? And just, whereas for me, I really say that it's more like learning a language than anything else. And that can be challenging at first. Like if you've ever tried to learn a language, like it is a little bit tricky, but you get a little bit of reputation and you get some good teachers, and all of a sudden it starts to come out a little more smoothly. And then once you wrap your head around it, it's really not rocket science. It's very, very simple. It is fascinating to me. We talked about sort of like green bonds versus investing in companies on the equity side, where they might do more investments into renewable energy or less, whereas the bonds tend to have sort of that longer term, almost like more perceived stability and maybe perceived impact. But I definitely see that, especially with beginners, that it's a lot easier to get someone to buy a green bond than it is to get them to buy a green stock, right? It's
Okay,
very
interesting. That's
interesting
surprising.
on the debt side. I think it just feels safer is kind of what I've come down to. Is I think with a bond, like they can just wrap their head around it, just feels safer.
I think that's great because some studies have shown that fixed income instruments also have higher potential for impact and more commitment to impact.
So,
Yep.
I mean, I think it's both. I think it's both. So, and to me, it does very much have to be both, but I think I'm a big fan of pushing on the door that opens more easily.
Mm.
Right. So, especially if if someone's nervous and someone's scared and someone's whatever, then it's just like, okay, what's the sort of the path of least resistance, the lowest hanging fruit psychologically and from like an emotional labor standpoint, right? To just get them to take that first action. And then once they've done it and they're like, oh, it's not so bad. And then, maybe they start to talk about it and they get sort of more comfortable in that language. Then it's like, then they can do more and more and more.
Yeah.
Um, I also think, one of the big challenges for folks is this notion of a perfect portfolio. Like I spent a lot of time teaching people, like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Mm.
I do think there's a broader thing here, like as it relates to sort of like environmentalism and kind of like the stories we tell
Yeah.
ourselves and the way it's presented. Like Sonia, I've been reading some of your work. I love you because you're a data person, you love the numbers, but you're also into storytelling and
Yeah.
poetry. And like I really think that is such a beautiful superpower. And I was reading one of your poems and there was a line that really struck me, which is that environmentalism is not one size fits all.
Hmm.
And that it really is, to me, this is, I think such a beautiful thing. And when it comes to all different aspects, whether it's our diet, our purchasing, where we live,
Hmm.
how we move around, certainly how we invest, it's not going to be one size fits all.
Yeah.
Right. How did you sort of come to that conclusion? Like what's sort of the aha for you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Do you remember like when everyone was freaking out about like having a metal straw and like making all their garbage fit into like a mason jar for like the entire year, like being that perfect and being vegan and being like meeting all these individual standards of action. I That is such an example of like perfect is the enemy of good. We don't need like 100 perfect environmentalists. We need 1,000 imperfect environmentalists. It's so frustrating that people in this space are aligned on their values and they get so into the weeds on how exactly to implement it. And it's not that easily solved at like a national or global scale. I do a lot of work in my community to advocate for really local solutions because the climate is going to change in different ways in different places. Like some places are going to warm, some places are going to get cooler, some places are going to get unpredictable weather that they've never had before. And you need to adapt to your unique circumstances. You need to work with the community you have. That's why we talk about community bonds. You want
Mm.
to support your own community's growth. And that's also why, for example, a project I've been working on has been installing solar panels on farms. And I was installing solar panels, or I'm working to install solar panels on a food bank in Ottawa. And the executive director of the food bank was like showing me around the land that they use to grow some of their food, and also land that they use to support recent immigrants in doing their own farming activities on the land here in Canada, because that's something that they were familiar with back home, and they feel that's like a way that they can feel that they can be connected to their new home, and so they welcome the community this way. But I was speaking with the executive director, and she's telling me like it's so easy to raise money for a new greenhouse, to build a new greenhouse. Like I can make that happen, but I raise it once and but guess it's gonna stand there for many years. And like this winter or last winter, the unpredictable weather like ripped a hole in the
Mm,
roof of the greenhouse and she needs more money to fix that hole. And she can't like find it. Like it's so
Mm.
repair is so challenging, but new things is so easy to kind of sell someone on and
mm.
um and work on it. But we really need to be reinvesting into what we already have. That truly is a more circular economy, a more sustainable long-term economy. If we are reinvesting into what we already have, into improving the efficiencies, improving like basically just you don't need to build new. You don't need to throw out the whole thing and buy a new thing, even though that's what consumerism likes to teach us. So environmentalism is not one size fits all. It really is unique to each person and their situation.
And I think if you look at it as one size fits all, like, yeah, solutions fall through the cracks. Something like impact investing. I feel like a lot of people don't realize that there's middle ground between just investing traditional stocks and donation.
Right.
That there's a huge middle ground to support activities such as all the sustainable efforts we see. Another stat we like to go to is how within a couple months of cannabis being legalized in Canada, um, Canadian retail investors put 4 billion into cannabis stocks, which is a third of the federal government's 15 billion Canada Growth Fund, which is the spearhead fund for mobilizing sustainable activities in Canada. Retail investors match that within a few months into marijuana, match a third of that in a few months.
Wild. Wild. Retail investors have a lot of power. But I do love this notion that it can be, I think to, raising money for new projects and new developments. And, there's something a little bit more logical about that. When I look at the system level, like one thing I keep hearing from folks is the need to improve the grid. That really it's like this grid infrastructure that is really kind of lacking and holding us back in so many ways, with the old system. So but I agree with you. I think it's a lot harder to raise money for, things that aren't sort of like sexy. Like if it's a new, if it's a new solar project on top of a food bank, like, yeah, let's go, like warm fuzzies galore. But, raising money, like a hydro company raising money to upgrade grid infrastructure that's going to allow those solar projects to like most efficiently, exist.
Yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
quite as
And
sexy.
going back to the transition scoreboard too, water investment is the same as transportation investment, but no one's talking about water
Right.
infrastructure investment. And that's such a win if that investment is going to improving our infrastructure. Like in Montreal, we lose like a third of our water to old infrastructure because we still have super old pipes. Some of them are even still made of wood, and we're just losing a third of water on transporting that water. So we're spending more money to deal with the amount of water that the city needs, and we're spending more electricity, we're spending more time, only to have a third of that wasted. So it's kind of ridiculous that the market does value, or people maybe value new things sometimes, and rather than going back to fixing what we have.
And I think it does speak, to some of the first things we talked about, this notion of triple bottom line economics, right? Sort of like people, planet, and profit. That, it's fascinating that the market has gotten so good at measuring the profit side of it. Like so good. And not only like in today's dollars, but like, forecasting the future and then, net present value of those future returns, like, does all of this incredible math to like get down to the penny. But so much of it is being left out, from the equation. And that, it's almost like it's in the blind spots of the finance community that we actually see a huge amount of value that
Yep.
isn't being captured yet.
Yeah, there is a lot of value not being captured. In economics, we call these externalities because they're external to the market. The market was not designed to consider them. And in clean growth, in clean economics or green economics, sustainable finance, we want the market to value those things. We want the market to integrate those things because, again, the market is not separate from the environment. It is not separate from social needs. Like if you don't have an educated workforce, then you will not have a productive workforce. So you need education in order for your market to succeed. If your workers are sick all the time, you're also not going to have workers to do the job. Like, and I spoke about those, both of those examples did not use anything related to the environment. It's just things that the market doesn't value properly and could benefit from if we focus more on environmental and social issues.
And in some cases, even if the market does value that, that this will save them costs in the long run, they don't have the investors there to say, what, I will invest in something that, that will take a little bit more time to structure, maybe is like a little less sexy. Can I use the word sexy on this podcast?
Yeah, hell yeah.
It's a little less sexy. And
Yeah.
we think retail investors could if empowered, stand up and appreciate those more niche and
Mm.
bespoke opportunities.
Yeah. And there's something that I learned about in my master's from one of my awesome professors, Nick Rivers. He talked about distributed costs and distributed benefits. And so the example that Calvin and I are talking about right now, it would be a concentrated cost to investors to improve maybe the health infrastructure, or add some sort of like scrubber to a factory nearby that's like polluting the air like crazy. That would be a concentrated cost, but it would have a distributed benefit to helping the health of many people. That valuable to the market sometimes, because the benefits don't go to like one person, to the one person that's going to make the most profit from it, or even to maybe let's say 5 people, 20 people, doesn't matter. Like how many people are there in a city that you're going to benefit by putting like a scrubber on their factory tailpipe, basically, or investing into their healthcare infrastructure. So many people are going to benefit, but only one person is going to pay, or maybe 5 people are going to pay. And that's not encouraged in the market system that we have now.
I mean, there are two examples come to mind for me that, are just so on top of this. And they do speak more to the more regenerative aspect of sort of impact investing. But there's a conservation impact bond, this really cool model. The Carolinian Institute is doing it, where it's investing in the conservation of the Carolinian forest in southwestern Ontario. Another example are these like social impact bonds, where we're actually investing in prevention. So something like the Heart and Stroke Foundation did this program where it's like, investments in preventing people from having heart disease, which saves the government a huge amount of money, or in supportive housing for folks, where it's like it costs like $30,000 a year to house someone in supportive housing versus like $500,000 a year for that person to be in prison, right? Which is often the alternative there. How do we make these things attractive to investors? Like you talk about this sort of the, distributed cost, versus the distributed benefit.
If it's
Right? That how do we like, is it's not just through the return. Like obviously it has to be an attractive financial return, and a lot of these models we can sort of like make it because there is sort of money to be saved in the prevention aspect. But beyond the financial piece, how do we make it more attractive to retail investors?
The model that we're talking about, community bonds, is really an example of distributed costs and distributed benefits, where a community bond, it's members of the community pooling their money to eventually, for example, buy housing where they can control like the market from making housing prices go crazy. Like, I mean, what have we been talking about in the news for months now? And that has the distributed benefit of distributing housing savings among many people. And that's rare. That's rare. The most successful community bonds, and I was talking to some friends at Tapestry, the most successful community bond raises come from people that are already connected to their community or want to feel connected to their community. If you feel like your city, like Toronto or Vancouver, Montreal, or a smaller city, I don't know, like Red Deer or Sudbury or Thunder Bay, has been good to you, and that's where your friends are, that's where your family is, that's where you grew up, then you want to pay it back. You want to be part of that community. Sometimes maybe you can't give time, maybe you can't give some other connections or work or whatever, but you can give money, and you would get that money back. I think people don't realize like these aren't donations. Like you get the money back, and that's something that we talk about. Where okay, well, I'm not like a rich person. I don't have like thousands to just give away. Like you don't have to. That's environmentalism is not one size fits all. This is a perfect example of that. Finance is not one size fits all. Community bonds are sort of an example of an approach that's more for the investor that wants to give back to their community, but also needs that money back, and wants to help things grow.
And to go back to the dashboard again, you can see that these sectors and activities are growing, that they make sense for them to grow. Just need to be able to empower communities and create the coordination necessary for different activities to scale up and integrate with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing, and I think that what people are craving more than anything right now is connection. And it's connection to their cities, connection to their institutions, connection to their neighbors, connections to their friends and family. I think that really is so understanding, that some of these movements, like when you talk about GameStop, that was people who were effectively able to create connection online. I think that a lot of retail investors, there's especially people who care about sustainability, probably aren't quite as chronically online, and so I think it is this notion of how do we, create community around this. And that if we're able to have those, the distributed costs, I love, I think there is a piece of this, to your point, Sonia, that not all of these bonds, like that conservation impact bond, isn't available to retail investors. That's only available to, accredited investors. So that means it's not a distributed cost. But if they can carve out part of it for a retail offering to make it available to regular and at a low investment dollar amount, then now all of a sudden it is. And then I think then inviting those investors to really participate in those benefits and to see it, with their own eyes, to feel the walls or, the trees with their own hand, to really have that connection, I think is absolutely so critical.
I think that's exactly it, Tim. So much effort goes into attracting international investors when what we're trying to do at Greenback Revolution is show how effort needs to go into attracting retail investors to invest in their own communities and establish channels to do that.
Yeah, instead of our savings going to Toronto and then leaving Canada forever or just going into global markets, we could be growing community wealth and community resilience here. That's also some of our work with the Canadian Coalition for Community Capital. We're basically one of their partners to help them increase Canadian investments in local Canadian investments. So basically, the mission is to unlock millions of dollars, hopefully billions, to go into real projects like renewable energy, like housing, affordable housing, local infrastructure, and not speculation on like what might sell, what might the price be, is it going to go up or down? It's going into real infrastructure that you can see and feel. If you're so inclined, you can definitely go to some of these awesome investments. An example would be the Ottawa Community Land Trust, which is buying housing to help control market or housing prices while the housing market continues to rise. If we can get those investments into recognized tax advantaged accounts, then that would further encourage Canadians to invest into our local projects. Because right now, yeah, a lot of tax advantaged accounts investments are going away from Canada, and I think that's a shame.
And I think Canadians, it can there's room for Canadians to make more use of the tax credits that get offered to bigger institutional players. That's another thing that Tapestry is looking into, and for Canadian retail investors to learn how Indigenous communities have created so much knowledge around community bonds and guarantees and investing in local communities.
Amazing. And we're going to be future episodes, on the show. We're going to be talking to some folks who are sort of lobbying for some of these policy changes to make it more accessible and attractive to retail investors. So, definitely make sure people are subscribed and tuned in for those further conversations. So before I let you go, just want to sort of leave with a call to action. If people love what you're saying and want to learn more, how can they get more involved in Greenback Revolution?
Go to greenbackrevolution.ca. If you listened this far, you're interested in sustainable investing. Maybe you already have some sustainable investments, and we have a button called Make a Disclosure, which is an all anonymous form, really easy to fill out. Basically, when you fill it out, you're saying or you're disclosing that you'll invest 25% of your money in sustainable investments. Doesn't matter to us, like we don't need to know, exactly how much that money is or exactly which ETFs you're investing in. But your own investments can build the green economy that we want to see. Can you believe that? So with this form, we ask some really easy questions. You're disclosing, you're making a commitment to the fact that you will put your investments where your values are. We estimate that if Canadians put 25% of their financial assets into the clean economy, then we can get Canada to where it needs to be so that we can actually be safe past 2030, and we can be a leader in the climate space. which we are already, like as a country, we're doing some awesome work. But we can go farther.
And we acknowledge that 25% is, maybe a bit of an ambitious goal, but currently it's estimated that European banks have 2 to 3% of their assets invested into certifiably sustainable opportunities. So the high bar might be high, but the low bar is something that I think we can step over.
Yeah. The bar is on the floor here. 25% is really easy and it has good returns. We're not just talking about community bonds here with 3 to 5%. We're here for the investor that is interested in high returns as well. And you can find those returns, but just tell us, what is your approach? What is your approach to making your investments align with your values?
I love it. That's awesome. And, getting people to sort of, add their name to the list. Let's show that this is becoming more mainstream, more normalized, that I do think that this notion of having a collective, a group, walking together, putting our money together, pooling it so that we can have a better world, a better future, that we can, have that positive impact.
Yeah. Also, studies from Reclimate show that when you ask Canadians, do you believe in climate change? Most will say yes. But when you ask Canadians, how many other Canadians do you think believe in climate change and take action on it? They will say less than half. They think less than half of other Canadians, even though they themselves do believe in it, they think other people don't believe in it as much as they do. And that's simply not true. That's what their research shows. That's what our research shows when we're talking to retail investors. People want to do this. We're not alone. We're not alone, and we can find that community just like GameStop found its community.
Amazing.
And we can change the market with our
Calvin,
diamond hands.
No question. No question. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was super awesome. Would really suggest anyone who wants to sort of follow the work of Sonia and Calvin to connect with them on LinkedIn. We'll put their LinkedIn profiles in the show notes as well. They're just such amazing sort of wealths of information and doing some really cool stuff in this space. So Sonia, Calvin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tim. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. You're doing great work and we're so happy to support it.
But excited to connect in all the future impact spaces that you're always highly referencing.
We'll be throwing some parties and having a good time everywhere we go. If you've made it this far, you're an absolute gem. Thank you. Stay in touch by subscribing to my free newsletter. Got questions about sustainable investing? I'm here to help. Join my classroom where I have lots of resources and mini courses. I also do monthly Ask Me Anything sessions so you can get all the help that you need. Links are in the show description. Cheers.